G'day everyone and welcome to the Trekzone Spotlight. Well, the Gremlins can't keep him away, neither can Larry Nemeczek. It's Doug Drexler.
Larry Nemeczek, my nemesis. Nemeczek, the nemesis. That's good.
Now, Doug, we had spoken previously, the one that the Gremlins had attacked, about your move into visual effects. How did that come about?
You know, the beauty of it was that, well, first of all, there was no way I was going to spend my whole life just doing one thing. There's just too many. That's how most people do it. They achieve a career, and that's what they stay with for like the next 40 years, whatever. And I never could, that never worked for me because, especially in, film and television, there's so much cool stuff going on all over the place. To just do one thing is just impossible. So I had this wonderful opportunity in being on Star Trek for so many years. And what I mean is that when you have a group of people who are together all the time for years and years and years, you can actually move sideways. It's easy to move sideways. But it's not easy, but I could go from the makeup to the art department to the visual effects department. And it's really because Star Trek. The other thing that's interesting is that we were the last time Star Trek really was like a family. We were all within a block of each other on the Paramount back lot. We saw each other every day. It was a big, big family, and everyone was in constant communication, and it was right here. You'd go over, Rick Berman's over there, the writers are over here, Bob Blackman, Mike, and that makes for an environment where you can move around sideways, which I did. I mean, when I was on stage on Next Generation, and that means long hours, and you're waiting between setups and things like that. I lived on the Enterprise D. I mean, I lived on it. I slept on the Enterprise D. I ate on the Enterprise D. I got in trouble. Me and Cosmo Genovese, who was the script supervisor at Next Generation, I would just wander the sets when we had time off because I loved them so much, looking at all the details and stuff. And I heard snoring coming out of sickbay. And I went in there, and Cosmo Genovese, older gentleman, a wonderful, sweet guy. He was like the heart and soul of the show. He was on one of the bio beds, and he had a napkin pulled over his face, and he was like snoring under there. And I was like, oh, okay. And I started going in there at lunch too, and being on a bio bed next to him, and we'd both be sleeping. And we got bawled out for that too. There was a memo went out about people sleeping in sickbay.
That is absolutely. Was sickbay one of the more quieter sets? Was it? You could get away with it for a little bit longer.
Well, they're all pretty quiet when they're not being used. They're a good place to sleep. But really, the hours could be. I mean, on the original Star Trek, they didn't have a lot of money, so Bob Justman wanted everybody off the clock by like 7, which to us seems, how do you even make a television show when you're knocking off at 7 o'clock? Amazing what they did, because we would go till 2 in the morning.
Wow.
And it wasn't unusual. And it would push into the next day,
And every day for almost 20 years, that those sets were active and were in the 24th century.
Well, they were for a period of time. They were the most continuously used sets in Hollywood. And starting with Star Trek: The Motion Picture, basically you'll notice when you're doing a television show and you start with a movie, say you start with Star Trek: The Motion Picture, when they decide that they're going to do The Wrath of Khan, which they want to do, like with TV money, you may redesign the sets, but you're going to keep them the same basic layout because the green beds on the ceilings where the lights are already in place. Why take it all down and start over? Which inadvertently led to because it was carried over on Voyager as well, that led to a kind of DNA where you could see it reflected in each ship as it came along. So there was always this interesting continuity that was going on. The ships were all related to one another. But anyway, and not to get too far off the subject, but I think we talked about the World's Fair at one point. That's the way the World's Fair. There was a 39 fair in New York City, and there was a 64 fair in New York City. And if you look at the two from the air, the layout is exactly the same, because in 1964 they said, well, we still have all the utilities in place from the 39, so we're going to build it configured like that. And that's the way the starships were for a long time.
It just saves money, and it's why break something that's not broken?
Yeah. I don't even remember what the original question was. What was it?
We're just having a chat, Doug.
Okay.
We're just talking about your career on Star Trek, and you were living on those sets. So that means vicariously through you, I was living on the sets as well.
I was falling in love with Mike Okuda from afar. I'd see him once in a while, and I'd chat with him, and then a couple of times I'd go up to the art department, and we found out we liked each other. But it was the details. I mean, the sets were gorgeous. They were not disappointing in any way when I was on them. They were just beautiful. It was the Enterprise. But then when I looked at the details that Mike had in his backlits, they were always very carefully thought out by someone who seemed to have an understanding of technology and engineering, even if it's maybe faux engineering. You could tell that he took it seriously. And Sternbach took that stuff seriously, and so did Probert, and Roddenberry, of course, always did. So that bled into the sets for that period. There's a certain reality that makes people at JPL get excited,
Well, I'm expecting Okudagrams on the very first Mars missions. Is that too much to ask, do you think?
Well, look, Mike has been doing mission patches for NASA over the last 10 years.
He has, yes.
So that's killer. That's just amazing that his emblems and designs are going out into the solar system. It's mind-boggling.
And it's such a well-deserved honor too for Mike.
Well, when I say that, when you have fans at JPL, they love what you did on the show, and it's part of what inspires them to do what they do.
I think you've made it in this world when you have fans at the Jet Propulsion Lab.
Well, I visited over there, and they always treated me like royalty, which was amazing to me. But I would see Okudagram screensavers all over the place at JPL. You don't see that from any of the other TV series or movies or anything. It's the Mike Okudagrams, the T-Bar graphics. It's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece because it's creative and theatrical, but also looks like it means business. And I find that on a lot of TV shows and movies, all of the graphics, they're interchangeable. It's like you could take something from, I don't know, maybe the current Star Trek, and put it on Hawaii 5-0. You can't tell the difference. They're interchangeable. But Mike's design was very bold and broad and not interchangeable. You can't put T-Bar graphics on Hawaii 5-0. People, they won't,
And it's part of that DNA that you were talking about, that Star Trek really, it became a production line almost, that 4 series came out of the same stages on the same backlot for 20 years.
I know. It was an amazing moment in time for Star Trek. You can't have the same kind of give and take and creativity when everyone is spread out around the world, or in the country, or in Toronto and Los Angeles and Vancouver, and nobody even knows who the art department is. When we were on the Paramount backlot, the writers constantly came through, and everyone knew everybody, everybody, and that was the beauty of it. I don't know that we'll ever see that again on a Star Trek series.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Do you think that that production line could be repeated ever again, or was it such a moment in time for Star Trek and in fact for television as a whole, given the way that the landscape has so radically changed?
I don't know. See, there was a period of time where Los Angeles was a hub of filmmaking. And that's why it was like that. But once, other countries and other cities, it started making movies all around the world, it wasn't important anymore. And you could, you might find a place in Tennessee you're going to get much more bang for your buck by shooting in Tennessee than in Los Angeles, because the way taxes are structured for film, So what they'll do is they'll shoot down on the stages there, and if they're saving money by coming out of Toronto, then the visual effects house is probably going to be in Toronto, because that's where the post-production office is going to be, and he has a guy he likes. So it's very, very, everything has been spread out all over the place. I don't know that we're ever going to see that kind of a ecosystem of Star Trek again, which is a real shame, real shame.
The visual effects team, and of course we talk of it now in 2018, but back in the 90s, they were practical effects that you were doing day in and day out for the show. When you get a brief, or when you got a brief for an episode, and it called for, say it was DS9's The Way of the Warrior, which is a season opener, so there's a little bit more time, but when you're tasked with a battle sequence without the computers that we have these days, where do you begin?
Okay, and that really, the people who deserve all the credit there, we're talking Dan Curry, of course, Gary Hutzel, Mitch Susskind, Ron Moore. These guys, it really is amazing what they did. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Ray Harryhausen. When Harryhausen was animating, figures for Sinbad movies, or, he didn't have any way to play it back and see what he was getting. He just had to keep it in his head. And if the phone rang or he had to take a call, so it's the same kind of thing. They've got the ships. They're not they're not even in the same space. They're shooting them, okay, we know we were over here, and we had you're kind of plotting these as they moved on. You kind of build a toolkit and tricks and things that you've done. You've been doing it for 10 years at this point or more, and you know what works. But in the beginning, I really, really got to hand it to those guys. Gary, who I worked with for a long time, who I met mostly because, and Dan Curry, or Mitch Susskind, I mostly Ron Moore. I mostly met those guys because they came to the art department a lot, and we'd hang out because we were all kind of the same. We enjoyed the same stuff. And because of that is how I ended up getting into visual effects. Because if they needed a Klingon space station or a little model of Utopia Planitia or something, and they didn't have any more money, they would come to the art department, because we used to keep a room full of old tank parts and model kits and sewage strainers and all kinds of crazy stuff. And so they knew we were big fans, and if Gary had the Enterprise lit up on the stand, he'd call us. Hey, I got the Enterprise on the stand. Come on down and see it. And so we would, or like when we were doing Tribulations, they had those models, and Gary said, I think they need a little more weathering. He'd call Mike, and Mike would grab me, and we would go down there with pencils. We'd be drawing on the model, so you get to know people and who you enjoy working with, and that's how I ended up doing visual effects. The shows were starting to shift over to CG. I knew they were using Lightwave, so I started using Lightwave in the art department, and I'd feel someone standing behind me, and it would be Gary like this going, So, just like where they would come up and we would build a Klingon space station out of junk parts, he was like, oh, maybe Doug can do some stuff for me in the art department, because if I go to the visual effects house, they get out the calculator and they go ching, 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 and I'm just going to do it for free, And so I ended up doing some stuff for Dan and Gary in the arts department. And so it was a natural, when Gary wasn't back for Enterprise and he was doing BSG, And he was calling me on the first year, and I was like, oh man, Gary knows I want to work with him, but I can't walk away from Star Trek. And then they canceled it. So I was on BSG at the start of the second season. But that's how that happened.
What was it? I know the answer to this question, but I want to ask you anyway. What was the mood like when Enterprise was cancelled by UPN, and the reality sank in that this was it? There was no more Trek, and the family was breaking up.
Well, first of all, it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling. I mean, I still keep the Okudas were still very close with them, the Westmores and stuff like that, but it's heart-wrenching when that happens, because you really are family. So a lot of tears and people, sad. It's funny that they didn't tell us. We found out on the internet. That's how we found it. No. But we knew something was up. We knew something was up, one, because CBS was buying Paramount, and we knew that was going to lead to some shockwaves, which it did. I mean, I think Enterprise was getting like 3.5 million viewers, and they weren't everywhere in the country. I mean, UPN wasn't everywhere. Today, that's considered respectable, especially with streaming. We didn't have streaming back then. The beauty of, I think we talked about this, Deep Space Nine and TNG was a brilliant move by the studio. I mean, they gave the shows basically to syndicated networks, and then they collected the lion's share of advertising. And so the syndicated networks would put it where they knew their audience was. Then when you go to a setup like UPN, it's just even getting it in some parts of the country. Not everybody gets sci-fi either, right? Maybe they do there.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a whole different landscape now, though. I mean, everything is available all the time, and even choosing what you want to watch is almost impossible.
I wondered too whether they, syndication in the 80s and 90s there almost sounds a little bit like streaming nowadays, where the product is given, it is different today. The product is given to the viewer, and the viewer will decide whether to watch it or not, and when they want to watch it. Syndication, it was taken out of the viewer's hands, but it was given to stations to put to air when they knew that their audience was watching, and maybe that's why it was so successful, as Discovery has been in its first season. I know that we spoke about Discovery, but you haven't seen it yet, have you?
I have not. I have not seen Discovery.
Do you plan to see it?
No, I don't. I don't have any plans to see it. You have to remember there's an emotional thing going on there. And plus, I was on the verge of being on the show several times and not treated well, and which is, that makes for kind of ill will in some ways. But so I don't want to know anything about it, because I don't want to have an opinion about whether it's any good or not. So I have no idea. I remember when we were on TNG, it was Relics, and Bob Justman came down to see that piece of the bridge. And after that was over, we took him over to Deep Space Nine and showed him the promenade. And we were shocked to find out that he hadn't seen it. And at the time, I couldn't understand that. And then now I understand. He said it was too painful for him. It's like watching somebody else on a date with Dorothy, my wife. I just can't. You have to understand, it isn't just 17 years or whatever I had on Star Trek. It's also, I was a part of it, its DNA from 1966. And so it's kind of uncomfortable to be on the outside looking in.
It's more about just seeing the children have grown up and moved out, and it's I guess it's bittersweet, as you say. And
well, look at it this way: it's like they burned down our village and took our land. It belonged was the paramount.
That's the other way you could take it.
Yes. Feels, you know, it was our home. It was our home, and
I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting too, chatting with you again about it, because knowing some of your feelings from our first recording shapes some of the questions I've been asking today. The DNA, I really like that term, and it really was more than just 4 TV series that were produced, you know, in studio. It was a family that was just making...
You know, one of the things that Gene always did, and I thought it's part of what gave Star Trek whatever, it's a certain je ne sais quoi, was that he was also, like the show was, between its characters, very loyal to people who'd been on the show. He wanted people who understood the show. That's why they kept so many people for so long. But then there was this like flip-flop, like the Earth changed its poles, and now they would prefer not to have someone who'd been on the show before. Because it's more about people making what they think is a better version of Star Trek. Why do I want to continue that line? And I understand that. I also understand that as time goes by, especially in design, you're going to get production designers who are younger. And they're going to want people they went to school with, or they knew, or closer to their own age. So, I utterly get that. You know, so it's just kind of a shame. I mean, I should be on a starship right now, but this isn't sour grapes because I'm getting in. It is sour grapes, but it isn't sour grapes because it's not like I'm not doing anything. I'm doing really interesting stuff. I'm doing, VR, immersive VR. I'm going to Cannes with a bunch of VR things I put together next month. That's really exciting, man.
Can you give us a little bit of detail about your work with VR?
Sure. Well, you know, the thing about immersive VR is that there really isn't a language for a narrative yet. How do you tell a story with it? And I run into this all the time when I run into directors, and they go, yeah, but how do you tell a story with it? They're used to being able to cut where they want you to see something else and point your face directly at whatever it is. That's part of their toolkit for narrative in movies. And I'm always surprised when I hear that because honestly, everybody wants to do stage, right? All actors want to do stage. It's a hybrid of stage and film. Because when you go to Broadway and you see a play, well, I can look anywhere on a stage I want. So how the hell are they going to get? They can't cut. You have to come up with a new language of filmmaking for it. And we're not doing games. You know, I'm not really that interested in games, frankly. I'm interested in what we've been doing is developing ways of doing cinematic VR that is beautiful to look at and tells a story and leads you along. And that's the thing. I couldn't sit still with makeup. I couldn't sit still with the art department. I couldn't sit still with visual effects. And here's the next interesting thing. And I have to say, if you're not in it yet, you're probably already too late. But this is an amazing moment in time right now. I've been to a lot of symposiums and things that Variety had and listened to studio heads talking about VR and where they think it's going. And all of them are like, they know it's going to be billions, it's going to be worth billions, but they're not sure how to tell a story yet. And at this point in time, it's anybody's game. It's anybody's game. It's an amazing moment in time. You know, the visual effects stuff, well, yeah, there was that moment in time where people were just picking up the computer, but now there's like 10,000 kids who want to do that, you know, you can find them all over the internet. Time to do the next cool thing.
They're in the palm of your hand now.
Time to move on to the next cool thing, and that is virtual. I see us melding together immersive reality, where you've got the goggles on and you're there all the way around.
Well, It sounds very exciting, and good luck with it all. And I think you're right. I think we will be seeing virtual reality a little bit more in the future. Probably more than 3D films.
A lot more. I'm telling you, look, they laughed at sound and they laughed at even color. So anyway, I'm sorry if I got off the.
That's perfect. You're here to chat to me, Doug, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming back as well to fight off those gremlins.
Oh, no problem. They're all over the place.